Your hotel reservation has been canceled. Figure it out yourself. The text came through at 2:15 p.m. while I was standing in front of 150 infrastructure professionals, mid-sentence, explaining why the Phoenix Metro water treatment project had a 73% chance of structural failure despite every assurance the contractor had given us. My phone was sitting right there on the podium, and I watched those words crawl across the screen while voices in the room waited for me to continue explaining why soil composition matters when you're dealing with Arizona clay layers. I'm Scott Patterson, 48 years old. 22 years as a civil engineer, the last 8 in the Army Corps of Engineers before transitioning to civilian consulting work. The Corps taught me precision, documentation, and how to build things that don't fall down. I thought I'd left the office politics behind when I hung up the uniform 4 years ago. I found him in the front row, Brian Foster, 45, VP of Engineering at Southwest Infrastructure Solutions. That smirk on his face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't some administrative mix-up or booking error. He'd planned this moment. My phone buzzed again. Vegas hotels are expensive. Hope you budgeted appropriately. 400 miles from Phoenix. No reservation. While I stood there representing work he'd never understood but claimed as his own for the past 18 months. I closed my laptop without explanation. The room went quiet. I apologize, but I need to step away. The handouts contain the complete methodology. Then I walked out, past 150 confused professionals, past Brian's satisfied grin, straight through the conference room doors where the air felt different than it had when I'd walked in. What Brian didn't know was that I'd been preparing for something like this for 8 months. Not because I expected him to cancel my hotel, but because military training taught me to assess threats and prepare contingencies. I'd learned exactly who he was and how fragile his authority actually turned out to be when someone looked closely. Before I continue, let me explain how someone can systematically steal your work while standing on top of it. Brian Foster got his position the old-fashioned way. His father owned the company. Richard Foster Sr. had built Southwest infrastructure from nothing over 30 years. Good man, solid engineer, believed in hard work and earned respect. The kind of leader the Corps would have respected. His son was different. I joined Southwest after leaving the Army. The job posting called it Senior Infrastructure Analyst, which translated to run the numbers on municipal contracts and tell us which contractors will fail, so the city doesn't waste millions on bridges that collapse or water systems that flood. After military precision and Army engineering standards, civilian consulting seemed straightforward. Show up, analyze proposals, go home. No drama, no politics. Brian interviewed me himself. During that meeting, he asked decent questions about my engineering background, whether I understood statistical modeling beyond basic probability, how military experience applied to civilian risk assessment. He seemed reasonable, professional. I thought we'd collaborate effectively. First week, he handed me a water treatment proposal and said, "Run the numbers, let me know what stands out." I spent 5 days on it, applying the same thoroughness the Corps demanded. The contractor's assumptions violated basic material science. They planned concrete curing in conditions that wouldn't work with Arizona's temperature fluctuations. Their cost estimates ignored geological survey data about clay layers that would create foundation problems. I wrote 15 pages explaining why the project would run 35% over budget and fail structural inspection. Brian read it, called me into his office and said, "Excellent work, really excellent. Mind if I present this to the city council? You're still getting familiar with local politics and contractor relationships. Might be better coming from me initially." Made sense. He was the VP with 15 years of local connections. I was new to civilian consulting. Seemed like normal corporate mentorship, the way senior officers guided junior engineers in the Corps. He presented every word as his own analysis. The council rejected the proposal based on his presentation. The backup contractor completed the project on time, under budget, exactly as my calculations had predicted. Brian got mentioned in the company's quarterly review for thorough risk assessment and sound technical judgment. I got nothing, not even a footnote. I told myself it was fine. Learning corporate culture, understanding how civilian politics worked, being patient while building credibility. Then it happened again, and again. Same pattern, same results. Over the following months, the routine became clear. I'd spend weeks modeling risk factors for municipal projects, library expansions, stormwater drainage systems, bridge retrofits, water treatment upgrades. I'd write detailed assessments explaining not just whether projects would fail, but exactly how failure would cascade through timelines, budgets, and regulatory compliance. Each report followed core standards: precise, documented, actionable. Brian would read them, compliment my thoroughness and attention to detail, then present them in council meetings I was never invited to attend. But he didn't just present my work. He simplified it, modified it, sometimes contradicted my actual conclusions to make himself look more collaborative with contractors. Something else started happening that Brian didn't anticipate. The city engineers began calling me directly. Not officially, just quick questions about proposals. "Hey Scott, what did you think about those drainage calculations? Can you explain that foundation analysis?" I answered honestly, showed my work step by step. When I didn't know something, I said so and researched until I found out. Military integrity doesn't change just because you're wearing civilian clothes. One afternoon, a senior city engineer named Ryan Walsh called about a stormwater project. "Brian says this contractor's solid, but something feels wrong about their calculations. You worked on this assessment, right?" "I did the initial analysis," I said. "What's your concern?" "Well, what did you actually conclude?" I pulled up my notes. Their gradient calculations assume uniform soil composition. The geological survey shows a clay barrier at 3.8 meters that'll create water backup. They're going to have flooding issues within 18 months. Long pause. That's not what Brian told the council. What did he tell them? That it was solid, low risk, recommended approval with minor modifications. My hands went still on the keyboard. In the course, misrepresenting technical assessments could get people killed and definitely got you court-martialed. "Ryan, I wrote a 12-page assessment flagging exactly that drainage issue. I recommended rejection." "I never saw that assessment," Ryan said. Brian presented a 3-page summary saying it was approvable with minor modifications. That conversation changed everything. I started checking after that call, reaching out to other city officials on projects I'd assessed. Same pattern every time. Brian was presenting simplified versions of my work that often contradicted my actual conclusions. When I recommended rejection, he watered it down to approvable with modifications. When I flagged major risks, he called them minor concerns. He wasn't just taking credit. He was misrepresenting my technical findings to make himself look collaborative to contractors. Building relationships by being reasonable, by approving proposals that made him seem easy to work with. In military terms, he was compromising mission integrity for personal advancement. I couldn't confront him directly. Corporate hierarchy meant he had protection I didn't have. Direct confrontation would end my career faster than it touched his. But the Corps taught me something valuable about asymmetric warfare. When you can't attack the enemy's strength, you undermine their foundation. So I did something different. I became excessively helpful to everyone who called. Every city official who wanted technical clarification got detailed explanations with follow-up documentation. Every contractor whose proposal got rejected could call, and I'd walk them through my assessment page by page, explaining exactly where their calculations failed. "Your timeline assumed 6-hour concrete curing at projected autumn temperatures," I'd tell them. "You need 8 to 10 hours. That cascades through your entire schedule, creates bottlenecks at the foundation phase, delays everything downstream by 3 weeks minimum." They'd thank me, ask if I did consulting work. I'd say not yet, but I appreciated them thinking of me. I was building something Brian couldn't see, couldn't control, and wouldn't understand until it was too late. Military intelligence gathering isn't about dramatic spy work. It's about patient documentation, pattern recognition, building comprehensive pictures from small details. I applied those same principles here. Every analysis Brian modified, I kept the original with creation timestamps. Every conversation with city officials, I followed up with detailed email summaries. I was creating a paper trail that showed who actually understood the technical work and who was just performing expertise. The documentation was methodical, file structures organized by date, project, and revision, email folders sorted by recipient and project type, everything cross-referenced and backed up. If someone wanted to verify who actually performed these assessments, the evidence would be overwhelming. 15 months into the job, Brian called me into his office with news that surprised me. "There's a national infrastructure conference in Vegas, 3 days. I want you to present our division's risk methodology." I stared at him. Brian had never let me present anything publicly. He guarded visibility like classified information, controlling who got credit for what. You want me to present your analysis framework? Show them how we evaluate proposals. Technical details, real examples. Good exposure for the division. I should have been suspicious, but I was tired of being invisible. After 8 years of Army briefings where competence mattered more than rank, civilian meetings where I couldn't speak felt suffocating. I'd be happy to. Excellent. I'll handle all the arrangements. The conference was massive. City officials and contractors from 35 states, billions in future infrastructure projects would be discussed there. Relationships formed at conferences like this led to major contract opportunities. Brian registered us both, booked flights and hotels, handled all logistics personally. Then 2 days before departure, he announced a client emergency, family issue requiring immediate attention. Couldn't attend. I'd represent the division alone. "This is your chance to shine," he said, that same smile he'd worn when taking credit for my work. "Make us look good." I spent the entire flight preparing. My presentation covered our complete methodology using real examples from projects I'd assessed. Technical details contractors could actually use to improve their proposals. The Phoenix Metro analysis, concrete curing calculations, soil stability modeling, why geological surveys matter in timeline projections. It was thorough, honest, and useful, everything the Corps trained me to deliver. The presentation was scheduled for day 2:00 p.m., medium-sized conference room. I saw several familiar faces in the audience, Ryan Walsh in the 5th row, a few other city officials I recognized, mostly contractors and municipal analysts I'd never met. This was the most professional visibility I'd had in 2 years. I made it through 14 slides, showed how we identified the Morrison Bridge Foundation problems, explained the mathematical framework behind timeline risk modeling. My voice was steady, the room was engaged, questions were technical and substantive. This felt like the Corps again, competence being recognized and respected. That's when the text message arrived. "Your hotel reservation has been canceled. Figure it out yourself." I stopped talking mid-sentence. Found Ashley Foster in the 3rd row, Brian's 23-year-old daughter who'd been assigned to observe my presentation for the division. She was smiling the same satisfied smile her father would have worn. The second message followed immediately. "Vegas hotels are expensive. Hope you budgeted appropriately." The picture became clear. He'd sent me here to fail, to present technical work he didn't understand, then cut my support so I'd be stranded, humiliated, desperate. Maybe I'd panic and call him begging for help. Maybe I'd scramble to find accommodations and look unprofessional. Maybe I'd finally learn my place in his corporate hierarchy. But he'd made a critical error. He'd assumed I was still thinking like a corporate employee instead of like a soldier. In the Army, when someone tries to sabotage your mission, you don't retreat. You adapt, overcome, and complete the objective. Then you make sure they never get the chance to do it again. I closed my laptop without explaining, said I needed to step away. The handouts contained the complete methodology. Then I walked out, but not to panic or scramble for accommodations. I had phone calls to make. I found Logan Pierce in the hotel lobby 30 minutes later, Senior VP for Municipal Oversight at Western Infrastructure Certification Board, the organization that determined which companies were qualified to bid on major city projects. I'd noticed him watching my presentation from the back of the room before I left. "Unexpected exit," he said as I approached. "My VP just canceled my hotel reservation while I was presenting our technical methodology on stage. That's unusual corporate behavior. I need to tell you something, and you need to understand why this matters beyond personal grievances." We sat in lobby chairs that smelled like industrial cleaner, while conference attendees walked past discussing multi-million-dollar projects. I told him everything. Not emotionally, that was civilian thinking. Clinically, methodically, the way the Corps trained officers to brief commanding officers on mission-critical intelligence. Here's how Brian presents my work versus what my actual assessments conclude. Here's the documentation I've maintained for 8 months because military training taught me to anticipate situations where evidence would matter. Here are the projects where he overrode my technical recommendations, and cities are now facing exactly the problems I predicted. "Why didn't you report this before?" Logan asked. "To who?" He's the VP with 15 years of local relationships. I'm a recently discharged Army engineer learning civilian corporate culture. The hierarchy protects seniority until costs become impossible to ignore. So why tell me now? Because he didn't just steal my work. He sent me here to present technical analysis he doesn't understand, then sabotaged me publicly for entertainment. I'm done protecting his reputation and the company's liability exposure. Logan was quiet for a long moment, studying me the way officers evaluated intelligence reports. Can you prove the work is yours? I opened my laptop and showed him everything. Original assessment files with creation timestamps, email chains with city officials where I explained technical details that contradicted what Brian had told councils. The stormwater calculations that proved accurate when that project flooded exactly as I'd predicted. Calculations Brian had simplified into minor concerns for easier approval. He read through the documentation without speaking, occasionally asking technical questions that verified I understood the analysis completely. Finally, he looked up. This isn't just professional misconduct. This is systematic misrepresentation of technical capabilities. Cities are making multi-million-dollar decisions based on false information about your company's actual assessment quality. Correct. What do you want from me? Nothing right now. But I want you to remember this conversation and these documents. I think they're going to become relevant very soon. He handed me his business card. Stay in touch, and find somewhere to stay tonight. I know the hotels here are impossible to book last minute. I couldn't afford to change hotels. Vegas rates during conference week cost more than my mortgage payment. But I had alternatives Brian hadn't considered. I called Ryan Walsh, asked if anyone from his delegation had spare space. He laughed. I'm sharing a room with 2 other city engineers. One of them canceled. You can have the extra bed. Ryan's roommate was Justin Clark from Seattle's infrastructure division. We stayed up past midnight comparing methodologies across different municipalities. I showed them my actual assessments, the ones Brian had modified before presenting to councils. Detailed technical analysis, precise calculations, comprehensive risk modeling. Justin studied the soil composition analysis for Phoenix Metro. This level of geological detail is more rigorous than most consulting firms provide. Why isn't your name on any of this work? Because my VP presents it as his own analysis. Ryan shook his head. We've been making critical infrastructure decisions based on what we thought was Brian's expertise. But it's actually yours. The technical competency we've been relying on comes from you. You should go independent, Justin said. Cities would hire you directly for this quality of assessment. I don't have the business credentials or industry connections. You have something better. You have 18 months of accurate risk assessments that saved cities millions when followed and cost them millions when ignored. That's more valuable than credentials. The idea planted itself deep. I flew home standby, spent the night sleeping in terminal chairs. Got back to Phoenix 28 hours after my presentation ended. Exhausted, furious, and strategically focused. Brian had moved into my office space while I was gone. My files were in boxes in the hallway. He smiled when I walked in. The same satisfied expression Ashley had worn at the conference. How was Vegas? Productive. Good to hear. I'm reorganizing the division for better efficiency. You'll be working from the annex building now. Better environment for focused technical analysis. Translation. Out of sight, away from city officials, buried where I couldn't build relationships that threatened his control. The classic move of insecure leadership. Isolate the competent subordinates who make you look bad by comparison. Understood, I said. Then I moved my boxes to the annex building and started building my exit strategy with military precision. 6 months of preparation meant becoming invisible in a way that made me indispensable. Every contractor call, every city official needing technical clarification, every request for detailed analysis, I provided comprehensive answers with thorough documentation. But I wasn't building Brian's reputation anymore. I was building my own professional network, one honest assessment at a time. The calls kept coming. Contractors whose proposals got rejected would ask what went wrong. Most consulting firms gave vague answers about not meeting requirements. I walked them through my analysis step by step, explaining exactly where their calculations failed and how to fix the problems. Your foundation design assumes uniform load distribution, I'd tell them. But your soil samples show clay pockets at 2.8 and 4.1 meters that create uneven bearing capacity. You need additional pilings at these coordinates, or the eastern section will settle 3 inches within 18 months. They'd thank me, ask for my contact information, mention they'd remember my help for future projects. I was systematically building relationships based on competency instead of corporate hierarchy. 3 months after Vegas, Ryan called with news that proved my assessment methodology beyond question. That stormwater project you flagged 8 months ago, the one Brian approved despite your warnings, the clay barrier issue, it's flooding, exactly like you predicted. Clay layer at 3.8 meters created water backup during the first major storm. Contractors trying to fix it, but it requires complete redesign. Cities facing $1.6 million in additional costs. I said nothing for a moment, processing what this meant. I'm sorry to hear the city's facing those costs. Brian's blaming the contractor, says they deviated from specifications. Did they? No. I pulled the original proposal. They built exactly what they said they'd build. Brian just approved it despite your technical warnings. Do you have my original assessment? No, just Brian's summary. That called it low risk with minor drainage concerns. I sent him my 12-page original within 5 minutes. The one that detailed the clay barrier problem, showed geological survey data, explained exactly why drainage would fail at that depth with specific timeline predictions. Everything Brian had condensed into 2 paragraphs that removed all technical warnings. Ryan went quiet after reading it. When he spoke again, his voice was different. I'm sharing this with the city manager. This isn't about credit anymore, Scott. Brian misrepresented critical technical risks. The city made a $1.6 million mistake based on false information. 2 weeks later, the city manager's office sent a formal request. They wanted all my original assessments for the past 18 months. Every project, unmodified versions, complete with calculations and supporting documentation. I sent everything. 68 assessments, hundreds of pages, every risk analysis I'd performed before Brian simplified them for easier approval. The investigation took 5 weeks. I wasn't part of it, wasn't asked to testify, but Ryan kept me informed. The city had approved 11 major infrastructure projects during my tenure. I'd recommended rejection or significant modification on 6 of them. Brian had overridden 4 of my recommendations to appear collaborative. 2 projects were now experiencing exactly the structural and timeline problems I'd predicted. 4 months after sending those original assessments, Logan Pierce called with news that would change everything. We're implementing new certification requirements for municipal infrastructure consulting. Every firm bidding major projects needs certified risk assessors, not just company certification, but individual competency verification. That makes sense from a liability standpoint. I want you on the certification review board. Part-time initially, 3 days per month. You'd evaluate whether assessors actually understand the technical work they're claiming credit for. I'm not qualified for that level of responsibility. You're the most qualified person I know. You perform genuine technical analysis instead of political summarization. That's exactly what we need to verify in other assessors. I took the position. The pay was modest, but it came with something more valuable: professional legitimacy. A title that said I knew what I was doing, certified by the organization that controlled billion-dollar project access. New certification requirements went into effect 6 months later. Every consulting firm in our region had to submit for individual assessment, not their company credentials, their actual assessors. The application required documentation of projects assessed, methodologies used, sample calculations performed. It was designed to verify that people claiming technical expertise actually possessed it. Brian's application landed on my review docket 4 weeks after implementation. He'd listed himself as lead assessor and primary technical analyst for every major project from the past 2 years. His submission included examples from my Phoenix Metro analysis, word-for-word passages from my stormwater assessments, even sections from my Vegas presentation copied directly as evidence of his methodology. I should have recused myself. Clear conflict of interest. But Logan had a different perspective when I mentioned it. You're the only board member who knows the actual history here. We need your technical assessment. An independent panel will verify your findings. I read Brian's submission that evening. It was impressive if you didn't know the work wasn't his. The framework was sophisticated, methodology thorough, sample calculations accurate. All of it came from assessments I'd written in that annex building while he took credit upstairs. Certification required an in-person technical interview. Live problem solving to prove competency, not just paperwork review. I scheduled Brian's for a Tuesday afternoon 3 months after his application arrived. He showed up confident. Professional attire, leather portfolio, that same satisfied expression he'd worn when stealing my work. Logan sat beside me. 2 other board members joined by video conference. Brian didn't know Logan and I had met in Vegas. He thought this was routine procedure. Let's start with the Metro water treatment project, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Your application lists this as an example of your risk methodology. Walk us through your timeline analysis. He started explaining, used my framework perfectly. Material delivery scheduling, weather impact modeling, contractor track record evaluation. He'd clearly memorized the presentation structure from my work. That's the framework, I said. Now show us the actual calculation. The Metro project involved extensive foundation work. How did you model soil stability risks with the documented clay layers? His confidence flickered slightly. We used standard geological surveys and regional soil composition tables. Which specific surveys? What were your clay barrier calculations? I'd need to reference the original assessment files for those specific technical values. You wrote this methodology. You shouldn't need references for your own technical work. I pulled up a document on the shared display. This is the original Metro assessment from your application. Do you recognize it? Of course. That's my technical work. Explain the soil stability calculation on page 9 with the clay barrier modeling. He squinted at the screen. I'd included my handwritten margin notes, the actual geological data from county surveys, specific calculations showing why standard foundation assumptions would fail with documented clay layers at 3.8 meters depth. This is very detailed technical analysis, he said carefully. I'd need time to review the specific computational values. Brian, this is your stated methodology. Your application claims you developed and performed this analysis personally. Can you explain your own calculations? He couldn't. Tried deflecting to strategic considerations, client relationships, project management experience. But when pressed on actual technical work, the mathematics, material science, geological analysis that formed assessment foundations, he had nothing substantive. The interview lasted 40 minutes. He left angry, portfolio clutched tight, that satisfied smile finally gone. I wrote my assessment that evening without emotional commentary. Just documented that Brian Foster couldn't demonstrate technical competency in methodology he claimed to have developed, couldn't explain calculations in his submitted work. Knowledge appeared superficial, focused on presentation rather than substance. The board's unanimous decision came back 2 weeks later. Southwest Infrastructure Solutions failed individual assessor certification. They could reapply in 24 months after implementing proper technical protocols and demonstrating genuine competency. For those 2 years, Brian's division couldn't bid on any major municipal projects in our region. Billions in potential contracts suddenly closed off, not because of personal grudges or politics, but because he couldn't prove he understood work he'd been claiming credit for. Brian tried fighting the decision, calling in favors with city officials, making it clear this was personal targeting by a disgruntled employee. But when those officials called me to verify, I had one simple response. The technical competency review is public record. The assessment methodology is documented. If he understood the work, he would have been able to explain it. 12 months after failed certification, Southwest reorganized Brian's division under new technical leadership. He kept his VP title, but it became ceremonial. No project oversight, no client contact, no real authority. His father, Richard Foster Sr., quietly reassigned him to business development where technical competency wasn't required. I started consulting independently 6 months later. Cities hired me directly for complex risk assessments. Contractors paid me to review proposals before submission, not to game the system, but to ensure their technical work would survive rigorous analysis. My reputation was built on work I could explain, problems I could solve, calculations I could defend under scrutiny. 2 years later, something happened that showed how completely the dynamic had shifted. A contractor contacted me about a major infrastructure project, needed my assessment for proposal submission. After reviewing their work, solid engineering, realistic timelines, appropriate specifications, I gave approval with minor modifications. One question, he said during our follow-up call. Who's handling technical review on the city side? I checked the project documentation. Brian Foster was listed as consulting technical assessor. He'd gone independent too, marketing himself with 15 years of municipal experience. His website featured case studies from projects I'd worked on, methodology I'd developed. That won't be a problem, I said calmly. If your technical work is sound, it'll survive any competent review. The project went forward. Brian approved it because my technical assessment was attached as supporting documentation. He wasn't foolish enough to contradict analysis bearing my certification. The project completed on schedule, under budget, exactly as my calculations predicted. That's what I learned from this whole experience. In technical fields where accuracy matters, there's ultimately only one question that determines everything. Can you show your work? Can you explain the calculations? Can you defend the methodology under scrutiny? Brian taught me that your professional reputation is either grounded in what you can actually do, or it's built on borrowed credibility that collapses when tested. You can fake expertise for a while, especially in hierarchical systems that protect seniority over competency, but eventually someone asks you to prove it, to open your files, show your work, demonstrate you understand what you claim to own. When that moment comes, and in technical fields it always comes, you either know what you're talking about or everyone discovers you never did. The military taught me that mission success depends on competency, not politics. That documentation matters. That integrity isn't just moral principle, it's operational necessity. Those lessons served me well in civilian consulting, even when the enemy wasn't foreign but the guy in the office above you. Brian canceled my hotel thinking he was stranding me in Vegas with no options. What he actually did was force me into conversations I might never have initiated, with people who mattered more than he realized. He pushed me to stop protecting his reputation and start building my own. He created the exact circumstances that led to his professional downfall. Sometimes the best revenge is just being competent enough to survive someone else's sabotage. The rest takes care of itself.